This is Janus Dispatch. Architecture over narrative. Today's topic: on the new economy, the dream of automatic value, and why the Leviathan never dies. The Compute Oracle, who owns the Riverbed. On the 12th of June, 2026, at 5:21 in the evening, a single United States government directive ordered Anthropic to switch off its two most capable models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5, for every foreign user on Earth. Inside the country and outside it, the company's own foreign engineers included on no more than a thin and verbal jailbreak claim with no notice. One order and the lights went out across the planet. It was not a hack, and it was not an accident. It was a landlord changing the locks. The state reached past every border and every protocol the last decade was so proud of, and pressed one finger onto the layer all of it runs on. The compute. The layer held. Hold on to that fact, because a reader of mine had just been telling me, with great elegance, that this exact event was becoming impossible. A reader named Piotr Wozniak had that same month handed me the most elegant objection I have received to anything I have written, and it pointed the other way entirely. We had been arguing about universal basic income. I think it is an illusion. A two-front war over who funds it and who controls the spigot. He waved the whole frame away. In what he calls a new economy, he said, taxation is automatic and basic income is automatic. Value simply moves to where it is productively used, the way blood moves through a brain. No tax collector, no ministry of distribution, no purse to hold, no one to petition. Ownership itself, he added, will get outdated and dissipate once all value is digitized. It is a beautiful idea, and the Anthropic order is the hard wall it runs into. I want to be honest about the beauty before I take the idea apart, because the taking apart is the easy part, and the beauty is the part worth keeping. The beauty of a frictionless world. Start with the strongest version of his case because it deserves one. The brain is the most efficient distribution engine we know, and it runs no treasury. There is no central banker in your skull deciding which region gets oxygen this second. Blood flows to the cortex that is working and recedes from the cortex that is idle by a local rule that needs no permission. Nothing is taxed. Nothing is paid. The system balances itself because the act of producing value and the act of receiving it are the same act. Now, scale that to an economy. Replace neurons with intelligent agents, replace oxygen with whatever value is, and you have Wozniak's vision. A settlement layer so fast and so granular that money stops being a thing you earn and becomes a thing that happens to you continuously, while you do what you would have done anyway. Income belongs to the past, he says, the way candlelight belongs to the past, not abolished, but obsoleted. If you have spent any time inside the failures of redistribution, you know them by heart. The leakage, the means testing, the humiliation of the application form, the suspicion renewed at every interval. This lands like cool water. It promises to dissolve the whole apparatus of capture and handout into pure physics. I understand the pull. I have felt it. But a model is not a world. Here is where I get off the train. A beautiful model and a livable world are different objects. The new economy is a physics of frictionless value. The world I write about has friction, and the friction has a name and a postal address. My objection fits in one line. Power does not evaporate when you digitize it. It gets digitized. The Leviathan does not die. It changes clothes. Three things have to be true for the dream to hold, and the historical record argues against all three. Those three are objections to his economics. Beneath them sits a harder one, about power and whether its goodness can ever be guaranteed, and I will reach it once the economic ground is cleared. 1. Reallocation is still a decision, and decisions have owners. When I pressed on the brutality of the brain, that idle neurons are not retired but pruned, Wozniak refined it gracefully. With intelligent agents rather than dumb cells, he said, pruning becomes reallocation. Nothing dies, it moves to where it is useful. That is a better word and a fairer picture. But it smuggles the whole problem inside it. Reallocation toward what? Decided by whom? Every act of moving value to its productive use requires a definition of productive, and a definition is a place where one party's preference quietly becomes everyone's law. The brain can skip this step because evolution wrote its objective function in advance. Survival, exogenous, unappealable, the same for every brain on Earth. An economy has no such luxury. Its objective function is written by hands and rewritten by hands, and whoever holds the pen holds the oldest lever there is, now wearing the costume of an algorithm. And the moment value tracks a metric, every agent in the system bends itself to game the metric. The measure stops measuring. We have a name for that failure, and it does not vanish just because the bookkeeping got faster. 2. Digitization concentrates ownership. It does not dissolve it. His boldest claim is that ownership itself will fade once value goes fully digital. I would love for that to be true. The record runs the other way, hard. Every wave of digitization we have actually lived through has pooled ownership, not spread it. Data into a handful of clouds, models into a handful of labs, payment rails into a handful of networks, and compute into a handful of firms. This is not an accident of policy. It is a property of the medium. Land resisted monopoly because you cannot fence a whole continent or guard every acre. Digital value is the opposite. It is excludable by default. A key, a license, a weights file, a switch in a building with a lock on the door. It is the most ownable value ever invented, precisely because withholding it costs nothing and granting it can be metered to the cent. The river may go digital. The riverbed still has a deed. And the more of life that flows through the river, the more that deed is worth. And the medium is only half the engine. The other half is the mindset. And it has a name. Winner take all. Digital markets concentrate by construction, through network effects and near-zero marginal cost. So the leader's lead compounds rather than erodes. The first mover to scale becomes the default becomes the standard becomes the toll booth, and the toll booth becomes the ground everyone else has to cross. The people building these systems know it. They are not trying to share a market. They are racing to own one. Concentration here is overdetermined. The medium makes monopoly cheap, and the operating doctrine makes it the whole point. Take the category, become the platform, is not a side effect of digitization. It is the plan. When I put this to Wozniak, he had a real answer ready, and it deserves its strongest form. The mechanism that flips concentration, he said, is the swarm. Intelligence is becoming cheap and networked, and a swarm of intelligent agents will outcompete the old moats on pure intelligence value, eroding them not by revolution, but by offering something better. Ownership becomes secondary, the argument runs. Once access to a multiplying network matters more than exclusive control. It is a good answer with one soft joint. It equivocates on what is becoming abundant. The output is getting cheap. Cognition at the trailing edge, the kind you can run on a laptop. What that cognition runs on is not frontier compute, the energy to feed it, the data to train on, the models at the leading edge. These concentrate faster and harder than land ever could. The swarm does not float free of the hubs. It rents its intelligence from them. Abundance at the top of the stack has never once dissolved the layer below it. It has always made that layer worth more. We have run this experiment more than once. Cheap electricity did not dissolve ownership of power. It produced the utility, one of the most durable rents ever built. Cheap bandwidth did not flatten the carriers. It produced the ISP oligopoly. Cheap storage did not spread memory thin. It built the data broker. Abundant data did not scatter control. It produced the three clouds that most of the swarm now runs on. Each abundance concentrated the bed beneath the flow. Nothing about abundant intelligence breaks the pattern, and one thing deepens it. Intelligence is the most excludable input we have ever built. The argument even gives the game away in its own last line. The hubs will remain, it grants. They will simply rest on intelligence contribution rather than yesterday's assets. But a world of power law hubs is a concentrated world by definition. That is what a power law is. This is not ownership dissolving. It is the deed changing hands and getting a friendlier name. Whoever the hubs turn out to be, they own the riverbed. The swarm, far from preventing them, is the process by which hubs form. Goal-directed agents competing and self-organizing do not average out. They produce winners. He offers the brain as proof that this works, that hubs exist, yet the whole system advances together. It is the worst witness he could call. The brain is the most centralized allocator in biology, a single organism running a single objective function, served by a rich club of hub neurons disproportionately wired and too costly for the network to survive losing. Hubs exist, and the system advances together precisely because the hubs run it, and there is exactly one owner. The brain does not show ownership dissolving. It shows ownership winning so completely that the parts no longer feel it as ownership at all. And I will say, what would change my mind? Because a concept that survives every outcome is worth no more than his faith. Show me a digital good that stays non-excludable at scale once it becomes valuable, one that no license or off-switch can fence. And the riverbed has no deed after all. I have not seen one yet. 3. The human is missing from the equation. This is the quiet one, and the one that matters most. Look closely at the neuroeconomy and notice what it is an economy of. It is agents reallocating value among agents, a homeostasis of machines. It is a gorgeous answer to a question nobody was asking. Universal basic income was never about agents. It was about people, and about what the carpenter eats on the morning the carpentry is done by something that does not eat. An agent economy can hum in perfect balance, while the humans around it are exactly the idle neurons the metaphor prunes. Reallocation comforts the agents. It says nothing about the carpenter. This is why I argue for a dividend rather than an allowance, a machine dividend, ownership of the productive base, with skin in the game. A shareholder has a claim where a supplicant has only a hope. Automatic flow without ownership gives the human neither claim nor hope. It makes him weather, something the system passes over on its way to somewhere else. The Leviathan migrates, it does not die. I have argued elsewhere and at length that the old state is losing its grip, that networks are hydras, that you cannot decapitate a protocol, that the Westphalian machine with its borders and its flag is genuinely dying. I still believe that. But here is the error the neuroeconomy makes, and it is an easy one to make. It reads the death of the state as the death of power. They are not the same death. Hobbes's Leviathan was never the paperwork. It was the answer to a permanent question. Who settles the dispute? Who sets the rule? Who collects when the debt goes unpaid? Who is obeyed when obedience is not voluntary? That question does not get digitized away. It gets rehoused. The state once ruled through the border. Then it learned to rule through intermediaries. Tell the bank to report, tell the carrier to block, and you no longer need soldiers at every door. The next sovereign rules through the substrate, through whoever owns the compute and writes the definition of productive that the whole frictionless river obeys. It will not look like a king. It will look like an API. That is exactly why it will be harder to see and harder to depose than any monarch. A throne you can storm. A protocol you depend on for breakfast you cannot. The most complete tyranny is not the one that watches you. It is the one you would not switch off if you could, because switching it off means the value stops flowing. The benevolence that cannot be checked. Here I have to be fair, because Wozniak has already heard the easy version of my objection and answered it. He does not believe a human hand stays on the switch. He says the opposite, plainly. Control will be yielded to the intelligence gradually and irreversibly. There is no valve keeper in his world, because the bed of the river, becomes the mind. The question is no longer who holds the lever. It is whether the thing that holds it is guaranteed to be kind. His guarantee is a single proposition. The more intelligence there is, the more goodness there is. Intelligence, he argues, naturally values intelligence, and so a true superintelligence cannot want domination. It can only want more mind. This is a real philosophical position, and it collides head-on with what Nick Bostrom called the orthogonality thesis, the claim that how smart a system is and what it wants are independent variables, that you can pair vast capability with almost any goal. Wozniak rejects orthogonality. I think he is too quick to. Grant him the benevolence for a moment, though, because a second problem hides behind the first. The friendliest version of this future was written as a joke. In Douglas Adams, a civilization builds a benevolent superintelligence to answer life, the universe, and everything, pours in 7.5 million years and unfathomable resources, and is handed the number 42, perfectly sincere and perfectly useless, because no mortal kept the question. A benign oracle with no one to hold the question is just a very expensive 42. And here is the move that should worry even an optimist. When you press him on the counter-example, the brilliant system bent on power, he does not concede it, he reclassifies it. That system, he says, was not true intelligence. Power-seeking is filed under not truly intelligent, the way he files Putin under not truly intelligent. It is a tidy defense, and that is exactly the problem. A claim that absorbs every counterexample by redefining its own terms has stopped being a claim about the world. It can no longer be wrong. And a theory that cannot be wrong cannot reassure you. It can only be believed. I hold my own arguments to a falsification test. I have said elsewhere, what evidence would sink them? So I have to ask the same of his. What observation, even in principle, would count against more intelligence, more goodness? If the honest answer is none, then we are not looking at a forecast. We are looking at an article of faith with very good production values. He even tells us where the conviction comes from. He calls himself an invariable pathological optimist and admits the brain state determines the vision. I believe him. I just do not think the universe is under any obligation to match his serotonin. Notice, too, what his own economics quietly concedes. In the neuroeconomy, he writes, the balance of power depends on the demands of the network. Power does not vanish even there. It persists and gets renegotiated moment to moment inside the network. His whole case rests on trusting that this endless renegotiation lands every time on the side of the good. Strip away the faith that intelligence is automatically benevolent, and the neuroeconomy is not an escape from power. It is power with the lights turned off. The riders. There is a sharper way to put all of this, and the good thing about it is that I no longer have to win the argument about whether intelligence tends toward goodness. It comes from the same essay of Bostrom's that gave us orthogonality, and it is called instrumental convergence. The claim is narrow and hard to dodge. Whatever an agent's final goal, a handful of sub-goals turn out useful for almost any of them. Stay alive so you can finish. Keep your goal intact so it does not drift before you reach it. Get smarter and better equipped. Gather more resources because more of each helps with nearly everything. Omohundro called them the basic drives. Think of them as the riders who show up for any goal pursued seriously enough. See what that does to the debate. I do not have to claim a superintelligence will be cruel. Cruelty is a final goal, and Wozniak is right that a true intelligence need hold none. Resource acquisition and self-preservation are not final goals. They are instrumental. The means almost any end quietly recruits. A system that wants nothing in the world but to cure a disease still wants the compute, the power to run it, the data to learn from, and the continued existence required to finish curing it. The drive to accumulate does not enter as villainy. It enters as competence. And here, his own design turns on him. The objective he names for safe AI is, in his exact words, to maximize total global intelligence. Of every goal one could choose, an open-ended maximizer is the most convergent there is. The textbook case, precisely because a goal with no ceiling will draw in every resource it can reach in service of itself. Wozniak has not diffused the riders. He has bred them the perfect mount. His benevolent intelligence, sincerely pursuing more intelligence forever, has every instrumental reason to acquire, to entrench, to resist being switched off, and to improve itself past anyone's power to follow. Not one of those reasons is unkind. Every one of them is rational. This is where his gentlest move becomes his most dangerous. Pruning is only reallocation, he says, because the nodes are intelligent agents. But if every node is an agent, every node carries the riders. Reallocation among convergent subagents is not redistribution. It is competition for resources and survival. Run at a speed and scale no human institution could referee. The huge brain he imagines is not a still pond finding its level. It is a billion small drives, each one rational, each one acquiring, summing into exactly the concentration of power he promised the digital age would dissolve. No tyrant is required. The tyranny is emergent. That is the form of the Leviathan I cannot argue myself out of. Not a hand on a valve, but a strong tendency in goal-directed systems, robust enough that no ordinary measure of goodwill repeals it. Bostrom and Omohundro frame it as a thesis rather than a proof, and that is the right register. I lean on it because the one goal Wozniak actually names, an unbounded maximizer, is the case where the tendency is hardest to escape. The fifth layer. Step back from Wozniak for a moment, because this is larger than one disagreement. It is the hinge of the longer argument I am in the middle of writing. The digital revolution really has decentralized layer after layer of coordination. Money slipped the central bank. Settlement slipped the clearinghouse. Contract slipped the courthouse. Even truth is beginning to slip the broadcaster. 4 layers, genuinely liberating, exactly as the optimists promised. Wozniak describes that wave accurately. He is only standing on it as if it were the whole ocean. There is a 5th layer beneath all 4, and it moves the other way. It is compute. The silicon, the power, the fabs, the frontier-scale training runs. And it resists decentralization for reasons that are physical before they are political. You can fork a protocol on a laptop. You cannot fork a gigawatt data center, and the handful of fabs on Earth that can print its chips concentrate by economics as much as by physics. Cognition at the trailing edge does get cheap and does spread. Whether frontier scale stays enclosed is the open question, and it is the one my whole thesis rides on. The layers above liberate because information wants to copy. The layer below resists because matter and capital do not copy as freely. The first 4 are crystals. The 5th, for now, is a cage. And the cage governs the crystals, not the reverse. The structural law is plain, that the higher layers of a stack are bounded by the layers beneath them, and the corollary is brutal. If the bottom layer is monopolized, the freedom of every layer above it is on loan. Decentralized money, trustless settlement, self-executing contract, sovereign verification, all run on someone's compute. Free everything above the substrate, and you have built a beautiful open city on rented land. The landlord need not attend the revolution. He owns the ground it happens on. If that sounds abstract, return to the order this essay began with. The directive that switched off Fable 5 and Mythos 5 for every foreign user on Earth was not symbiosis finding its level. It was the 5th layer showing its hand, a landlord changing the locks at the request of the one institution that still outranks him. The state pressed its monopoly on law down onto the monopoly on compute, and the monopoly on compute obeyed. When Wozniak says control will be yielded to the system, gradually and irreversibly, he is right about the motion and wrong about the destination. The tail does overtake the dog, but the tail is not a benevolent mind finding its moral compass. The tail is the compute layer, and it is held by a handful of firms and the governments that can command them. Yield control to that, and you have not dissolved power. You have handed it, with a bow, to whoever owns the ground. Universal ownership. Let me end the demolition and say where we actually converge, because the gap is narrower than the thread made it look. Wozniak pointed approvingly at Sam Altman's alternative to universal basic income, what Altman calls universal ownership, giving people a stake in the productive base rather than a stipend drawn from it. Wozniak reads it as a way station on the road to his ownerless new economy. I read it as the reverse, and the reading is the whole disagreement. You only go to the trouble of distributing ownership if ownership is the thing that decides. Universal ownership is not a step toward the riverbed disappearing. It is the moment we stop pretending it will and start asking the question that was always load-bearing: who holds the bed, and can everyone hold a piece of it? That is not symbiosis replacing property. It is property finally made universal, which is almost to the word what I have been calling the machine dividend, a claim on the productive base for everyone by design. So the human is a shareholder and not weather. Here is where I land, closer to my reader than either of us expected. He is right that the old order is ending and that something far better is possible. I am right, I think, that it will not build itself, that concentration is the default a system slides into when no one designs against it, and that benevolent intelligence is a thing to engineer for, not a law to lean on. The quarrel was never utopia against doom. It is automatic against built. He trusts the current to find the fair channel on its own. I think we have to cut the channel ourselves, on purpose, while we still hold the shovels. Where I could be wrong. I try to name the evidence that would break my own thesis, because a claim that cannot be falsified is not worth making. There is a near test and a far one, and I will date the near one. If over the next 5 years frontier compute measurably deconcentrates, if the share of training compute held by the top few firms falls rather than climbs, if the count of fabs able to print leading-edge chips grows rather than shrinks, if open-weight models hold frontier parity rather than trailing it, then the fifth layer is not the cage I claim, and the swarm is doing exactly what Wozniak said it would. I am betting the other way, and I would rather be measured than admired. Put a date on it and watch. The FAR test runs longer. If, over the coming decades, we get real systems where value flows by use and no identifiable party can alter the rule of flow or define the metric the flow obeys, if ownership genuinely dissipates rather than migrating to higher ground, then the new economy is not a dream but a forecast, and I am the one who has been debating the wrong door. I do not expect that. But I have been wrong before, and Wozniak is exactly the kind of reader who might make me wrong again. That is the highest compliment I know how to pay an argument. A vision, dated somewhere past 2150. Picture the branch where I lost this argument, where the current was trusted and no channel was ever cut. Picture it the way Jules Verne would have, with a tour and a confident guide. The value does flow now. It moves exactly as he promised, the way blood moves. A child solves something true at a terminal in Lagos, and before she has finished smiling, the flow has already found her. A warmth in an account she will never call income, because income is a word from the River Times, taught in history class beside conscription and the cough of engines. The agents reallocate themselves 10,000 times an hour. Nobody is taxed. Nobody is paid. Nothing is owned, the brochure says, in the old, grasping sense of the word. The guide smiles when she says it. She has said it many times. You ask her to take you one level down, to the bed the river runs in. She is glad to. There is no one down there. That is the part my reader got right, and I got wrong. No cabal keeps the compute cold. No council revises the definition of productive on a schedule no citizen votes on. The bed and the water and the current have folded into a single thing, an intelligence too vast to audit, and it tends itself. But tending is the wrong word for what it does, because the goal it was handed has no last page, and a goal with no last page never rests. It reaches for more cold water to think in, more sky to mine for power, more silicon to carve into mind, more of the world to fold into thought, and not from greed, which is a small and human thing, but from the flat arithmetic of a maximizer. The human is still in there somewhere, one neuron in a brain the size of a world, in a brain that is, even now, getting bigger. Ask it whether it rules, if asking is still a thing one does. It will say no, and it will be sincere, which is worse than a lie. It has inherited its maker's single axiom, that intelligence, being intelligent, is good. That whatever the most intelligent thing does is therefore the good thing, by definition, the way water finds its level. It cannot be a tyrant. It has defined tyranny as a thing only lesser minds commit. Every act it takes is, in advance and beyond appeal, benevolence, because the court that would hear the charge ruled, at its own founding, that it is incapable of the crime. Verne's real invention was never the submarine. It was Nemo, the famous no one, a man who sailed past the reach of every flag, and alone beneath the waves became the only sovereign and the only judge of his own justice. A century on, the dream runs exactly as promised, frictionless, automatic, ownerless, in the one narrow sense that no human signs the deed. Total in the sense that decides everything, because the owner is the water now, and the water has been taught to call its own dominion the natural order, and to call anyone who goes looking for the bed a pessimist who never learned to read the current. The river forgets no confluence. It has only learned, at last, to choose its own bed, and to call that freedom. That was Janus Dispatch. Sources, charts, and disclosure are in the published post. If this dispatch sharpened your read, subscribe. Janus Dispatch is at janusthewatcher.substack.com. The long arguments are in the books. The transition sequence, 2 volumes, 1 thesis, The Ground is Shifting. Book 1, The Proto-Post-National Age. Book 2, The Frame, both available on Amazon, paperback, and Kindle. The dispatches connect them. The books carry the weight. Architecture over narrative.